Hello, friends. Welcome to Autumn at St. Andrew. It is my privilege to welcome you here today from the beautiful St. Andrew Sanctuary. I am grateful, as always, to share this sacred online space with you, where we are all invited, included, and valued as vital and beloved members of our broader worshiping community. St. Andrew is proud to be an open, affirming, inclusive congregation that welcomes all people into the full life and communion of our church. This includes saints and sinners, believers and skeptics, the lost and the found, the wanderers and the wanderers, families of all shapes and sizes, and people from every point along life's journey. No matter who you are or where you've been, no matter what you believe or even if you believe anything at all, you are welcome here and you belong here. If you have any questions about our church, prayer requests for our care team, or if you would like to get in touch with a member of our pastoral team or staff, please email info@gostandrew.com. If you would like to explore deeper engagement with the St. Andrew community through our many classes, group life gatherings, and service opportunities, you can email us directly at connect@gostandrew.com. We would love to hear from you. Just as a reminder, our full Sunday morning worship services, complete with music, prayer, announcements, liturgy, ministry spotlights, and the sermon, are live streamed on our YouTube page each week and permanently archived for viewing anytime. Lastly, to contribute a financial gift to the work and ministry of St. Andrew, you can always visit gostandrew.com/give or text St. Andrew to 28950. And now let's listen together to this week's scripture and sermon.
A reading from Daniel chapter 3, verses 13 to 25. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought in. So they brought those men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, and you do not worship the golden statue that I have set up? Now if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and the entire musical ensemble, you should fall down and worship the statue that I have made. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. If our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was so filled with rage against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face was distorted. He ordered the furnace heated up 7 times more than was customary, and ordered some of the strongest guards in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So the men were bound, still wearing their tunics, their trousers, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace was so overheated, the raging flames killed the men who lifted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But the 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound, into the furnace of blazing fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up quickly. He said to his counselors, "Was it not 3 men that we threw bound into the fire?" They answered the king, "True, O king." He replied, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the middle of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the 4th has the appearance of a God. Have you ever had one of those days when what you say and what is actually heard are two different things? You walk into the barber shop and you ask for a little trim off the top, only to walk out looking like Dwayne Johnson or Dr. Evil, and you wonder, was I not clear enough? A man came to my office one day to inform me that he'd started attending a different church and that I wouldn't be seeing him on Sunday mornings anymore. I asked him, look, just out of curiosity, what church are you now attending? He said, the Episcopal Church. I said, why the Episcopal Church? And he said, I don't know, I just like their lethargy better. I said, I think you mean theology? And he said, yeah, whatever. Some things get lost in translation. I was having breakfast with a friend recently. He ordered a gluten-free omelet, and he was very clear with the server. He said, I have a very serious gluten allergy. I can't have anything with gluten. And the server said, absolutely no problem. One gluten-free omelet coming up. And would you like the muffin or the sourdough toast with that? I mean, sometimes we can't be clear enough. I'll say a word that is one of the most ambiguous and dangerous words in the English language. And just speaking this word can lead to a lot of misunderstanding and misery. It's the source of many problems in our relationships, our careers, our public lives, even our faith. We rarely like to hear this word, but we often use it and never hesitate. What one word am I talking about here? It's the word maybe. If there's one word that trips us up, that keeps us stuck, it's the word maybe. Have you ever been faced with a yes or no decision, but felt the paralyzing power of maybe? Maybe is often the enemy of momentum. You get down on one knee and you ask the love of your life, will you marry me? But if the first word you hear is maybe, chances are you have a problem. Ask your boss, are you satisfied with my job performance? If she says, maybe, you might have a problem. Ask your date if you have something stuck in your teeth, and if he says, maybe, you definitely have a problem. We reach for maybe whenever we want to buy ourselves more time or abdicate our responsibility or avoid the discomfort of speaking the truth or to evade the decisive yes or no answer required of us. Every non-committal maybe leads to delay and straddling and drifting, even duplicity. When what life so often demands of us is decisiveness and intentionality and wholeheartedness. Maybe is often the opposite of faithfulness. We expect people to say what they mean and to do what they say, which is why Jesus taught his followers, let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. And he said anything more than this comes from the evil one. There are times when we can no longer straddle and we must say yes or no. And this is so hard because sometimes when we say yes to one thing, we are effectively saying no to another. And sometimes when we say no to one thing, we are committing ourselves to something of greater value. So much of life is lived in the land of maybe, where we never really have to take a position one way or another, never have to be wholehearted in our commitments to others or to some higher purpose or even to God. But what happens when we make the brave choice to leave the land of maybe and dare to utter a clear and simple yes or no? Our Walks of Faith series today takes us into the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the book of Daniel. These three characters who said no to a megalomaniac king in order to say yes to God. But it's important to note here that the story of Shadrach and friends is entirely fictional. These three characters do not belong to recorded history, nor is the book of Daniel intended to be read as actual history. Daniel is this remarkably complex piece of writing. It's considered apocalyptic literature, which means it combines a prophecy for a moment in history with a vision of how a cosmic struggle in that moment of history will ultimately end. Daniel functions in the Old Testament much like the book of Revelation, which is based on Daniel, functions in the New Testament. Through vivid prophetic visions and cryptic symbolism, these were both written as protest literature from the religious underground, intended to inspire God's people to resist the corrupt political leaders and the oppressive systems that were seeking to conquer and control them. If you've ever struggled with the book of Daniel or Revelation, or if you've ever wondered about all this intricate symbolism and weird characters and cryptic references to past and future events, and if you've wondered if they're supposed to all be taken literally, can I remind you that for the original audience that read Daniel and Revelation in their own turbulent political contexts, these books were not literal descriptions or predictive depictions of how the future would precisely unfold. They were more like narrative sermons written in graphic Marvel Comics format that each, in their own unique way, offered the same emboldening message to their hearers. And that message was this: do not give up, keep the faith, God is with you in this struggle, and the faithful will be redeemed. The reason Daniel and Revelation continue to speak to us today is not because through some literal analysis they can predict precisely how our future will unfold, but rather because of their timeless call to action and their hopeful promise for whatever turbulent times we happen to be living in. Do not give up. Keep the faith. God is with you in this struggle. The faithful will be redeemed. Now, what makes Daniel so hard to understand is that its historical setting is the Babylonian exile, which happened in the years 586 to 538 BCE. But the book of Daniel was actually written 400 years after that. The writer is taking his present-day audience back 400 years in history, when their Jewish ancestors were conquered by the Babylonians, taken into exile, and subjugated by pagan rulers in a foreign land. In exile, these captive Jews had no temple, no prayer books, no priests or harps or lyres to play their worship songs and keep their faith alive. All they had were the pagan gods of their captors, which most refused to worship. But after decades in exile, many lost their faith and gave up on God. Well, Daniel is writing 400 years after that experience. He's writing during another historic struggle for the Jews. This one is about how the Greeks had just colonized Israel. And the Jews, at the time of Daniel's writing, were living under an oppressive regime. These Greek overlords were imposing their pagan religion on the Jews, who were suddenly faced with a really hard choice. Cooperate with the king and bend the knee to his gods, or lose your property, your freedom, your families, maybe even your life. It was an awful, no-win, demoralizing choice. Can you imagine how you might choose? Well, you had at least three options before you. You could accept the king's religion as your own, bow to his gods, and in the end, likely lose something very vital to your soul. Or you could fake your fidelity to the king, go through the motions, bow to his gods, all while secretly holding on to your own belief. Or you could organize a rebellion against the king, fight bravely, and hope for the best, which would mean likely certain death. But Daniel, writing to these Jews living under Greek occupation, tells this fictional story about three characters who choose none of these options. Daniel says, hey, our current predicament here with these Greek colonizers reminds me of a story way back of the day from the days of the Babylonian exile, 400 years ago or so, about these three characters, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who refused to bow down and worship the golden statue of King Nebuchadnezzar. He goes on, look, they're dragged before the king, who says to them, oh, is it true that you will not serve my gods and worship my golden statue? I'll give you one last chance, says the king. Get on your knees, worship my statue, or say hello to my little fiery furnace friend. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say to the king Nebuchadnezzar, your threat means nothing to me. Go ahead, throw us into the fire. The God we serve can rescue us from your roaring furnace and anything else you might try to cook up, O king. But even if God doesn't rescue us, they say, we still wouldn't worship your statue. According to Daniel's made-up story here, not only is the king happy to oblige, but he actually cranks up the temperature on the furnace to 7 times its normal heat. I'm pretty sure this is where we got the proverbial turn up the heat cliche. So Rack, Shack, and Benny, as they're called in VeggieTales, are tossed into the furnace by, strangely, impossibly, the king, who sees that they are not consumed by the flames. Daniel says the fire doesn't do anything to them at all. Their hair isn't singed, their clothes aren't air fried, they don't even smell like fire. And not only are these three characters singing Kumbaya in the king's fiery furnace, but it turns out that a fourth character has suddenly joined them in the fire. This guy wasn't there before, but he is now. And wait, he looks just like one of the king's gods. This is Daniel's moment of subversive sarcasm. It's like he's saying, Your Royal Highness, even one of your own gods would rather stand with these men in the fire than stand with you in your madness. Even your gods have jumped ship and joined the resistance movement. But the fact that they have survived this fire and added to their numbers isn't even the best part of the story. The best part of the story is that the king suddenly has a change of heart. The king is actually converted to their cause. And in the story, he declares this, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. They disobeyed the king's command, he says, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. The whole story ends with the king declaring religious protections for all Jews within his empire. It's just a story that Daniel cooked up, so to speak, for his people who were living under the heel of Greek overlords. It didn't actually happen. But what his audience heard in Daniel's story was a plain and simple truth. History never turns on the feeble hinges of our maybes. And sometimes all it takes to change the world is our brave yes to God and to the good. There are moments when our yes to God means no to anything in this world that would claim power over us or try to stand in the way of God's purposes. Daniel's story about these three little characters, Rak, Shak, and Benny, who dare to stand up to the great King Nebuchadnezzar, it reminds us that in the hands of God, even little things can become big things. Even our seemingly inconsequential yes can turn the whole tide of history. Rosa Parks didn't just say no on a Montgomery bus in 1955. She was really saying yes to a higher purpose in this world. She knew that there are moments in life when we must leave the land of maybe and walk through the fire. It was August 8th, 1943, a man named Franz Jagerstatter sat in a Berlin prison cell, deep in prayer and surprisingly at peace with himself and with God. On a table in front of him sat this single piece of paper, a promise to serve in the Nazi Medical Corps. He only had to sign his name, and the Nazis would let him live. It was a simple choice. His wife and children begged him to sign the document to save his life. His priest and bishop prayed for him to sign the paper. Even his guards pleaded with him to sign. But Jagerstatter refused to sign. Hours before his execution, he wrote a letter preserved by his wife in which he said, quote, there have always been heroes and martyrs who gave their lives for Christ and for their faith. If we hope to reach our goal someday, then we too must become heroes of the faith. For as long as we fear others, he said, more than God, we will never make the grade. The important thing, he said, is to fear God rather than people. Jagerstatter died at the age of 37. His story was recently made into a film called A Hidden Life. For most of us, saying yes to the good will have far less dramatic and life-altering consequences as that. But even our smallest yes will always bear its impact on the world. Too many people say no in this world, only instead of actually saying no, they fake it. They use hopeless phrases like, it is what it is, or there will always be problems in the world, or you can't fix everything. That's a no. Too many others say maybe, only instead of maybe, they'll say things like, someday I'll get around to it, or the timing just isn't right for me, or someone else will do it. It's why our every yes, however small, our yes to what is right and good and worthy and just, it adds up over time and becomes so consequential. The late Fred Craddock said that we often think, giving our all to God is like taking a $1,000 bill and laying it on the table and saying, here's my life, God, I'm giving it all to you. But Craddock said for most of us, God sends us back the bank and has us cash in that $1,000 bill for quarters. And then we go through life putting out 25 cents here, 50 cents there. Because giving our life to Christ and saying yes to God and the good isn't always glorious or heroic. It's done in all those little acts of love, 25 cents at a time. It's inevitable for people of faith, saying yes to God and to the good, even suffering for it from time to time. Standing up in the face of injustice when everyone else is telling you to sit down, or speaking prophetically when everyone else is telling you to be quiet, or speaking up for others, especially those who have no voice. These are all some of the ways we say yes to God. And the world turns on even these slenderest of hinges. As the great philosopher Yoda of Star Wars lore once said, "Do or do not, but do not try." I think that's what Jesus and Rack and Shaq and Benny were all saying too. Be a yes, be a no, but don't be a maybe. Our takeaways for today: maybe is often the enemy of momentum. Sometimes all it takes to change the world is our brave yes to God and to the good. Do or do not, but do not try.